I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Mercedes-Benz A-Class. And this is a big day here on Chasing Cars because this is the first Benz review that we've ever done. So a big thank you to everybody who subscribed, commented, liked and shared the videos over the years, because it actually does make a really big difference, because it means that we have the opportunity to take this in-depth look into, lots of different types of cars in the Australian market and let you know our honest opinions. So that's what we're going to be doing today about this A-Class. Now, this particular one is the A250, which is kind of in the middle of the A-Class range. There's an A180, there's an A200, and then above this, there's two AMG feddled versions of the car. But really, the A250 is where you should be thinking about starting in the range, because this is where the A-Class actually gets good. It's the first model in the range to have a purely Mercedes-Benz engine. The two lower-end cars have a little 1.3 litre turbo, mainly developed by Renault, and that's okay, but this is really where it's at. And actually in Australia, the A-Class isn't bad value. This one has basically everything you could want on it, and it's still only in the mid 60s. Sure, that's quite a lot for a small luxury car, but the way I've been thinking about the A-Class, driving it for the last few days, is that it does feel kind of like a Mercedes-Benz experience distilled into an urban-sized car, and I guess that's appropriate whether this is your first luxury car or if you're downsizing from a larger Benz or a similar product like that into something that is sized to kind of suit your lifestyle now. But we'll see if that is reflected further on in this car, starting in the interior. Now, for a while, I've really thought that Mercedes-Benz tends to go in waves of quality. They sort of go through years of building really nicely built cars, where everything feels really durable and high end, and then kind of through some years that don't feel as amazing. And I think that Benz are at the moment pulling out of one of those periods and back into a real renaissance of building really good product. And the A-Class is kind of the start of that new era, because this cabin introduces the new design language that Mercedes-Benz are going to be following from this point forward, and we've seen it applied to a few cars since the A's introduction pretty recently. But it's built around this very broad-looking dashboard, extremely clear integration of technology with these pretty impressive two dual screens that sit in front of you, and the pervading feeling in here is actually one of quality. Like, everything feels really nicely screwed together. The materials are all really plush. This lovely little steering wheel here, small hub, this nice sort of metal spokes. We've got soft touch here on the door tops. We've got it on the dash. We've got nice perforation here on the mid-center of the dash. And, it just feels like quite a premium product, like definitely a step up and beyond something like a Volkswagen Golf or the outgoing BMW 1 Series. So that's cool. I also quite like some of the flourishes. These rotary air vents, we've seen that developing as a trend over the years in Mercedes products, but these ones look even better than they used to. And just little things that, are traits of Mercedes-Benz, but make these cars quite easy to use, like the seat controls being up here where you can actually see them. That being said, I don't love everything about this car. You do have to spend some time kind of getting used to the command system, which used to be driven by a rotary dial, and there's now sort of a flat trackpad. You do have to spend, a few hours, the volume's come up out of nowhere, but you do have to sort of spend a few hours sitting down with this car, learning how all of the pretty complex functions work. But once you do, it can be quite rewarding, because you've got these two little trackpads here on the steering wheel. The left one controls the left screen, the right one controls the right screen, and once you've got it all worked out, it does make sense. Something else I like, the seats. They're kind of firm, but firm in that Germanic way where they're supportive, and they're also finished in quite high-grade leather. Here we've got the two-tone black and grey, but there's lots of other different choices. You can also get black and red on the AMG line, or more conventional colours on the sort of more luxurious, less sporty emphasis cars. And finally here, it's fairly practical. I've got a bin that opens up both sides, classic Benz trait. Two USB-C ports in there, a third USB-C port here in the center to run the smartphone mirroring, another two in the back actually. And that's where we're going to go now, because while the A-Class is definitely designed to be a car mainly for two people sitting up front, any hatchback has got to be able to transport people in the back, and that's what this one can in fact do, and it does it better than the outgoing product. So Legroom, it's okay. Sitting behind myself, I've got another inch or so of legroom. Toe room's a bit tight, but headroom is the standout actually. I've got a bit more headroom than I would have expected, and in the old A-Class, my head was actually touching the roof, so this one is a definite improvement. Got a few amenities, flip down armrest here, individual cup holders slide out of that, that's pretty handy. We've got air vents, very good for a country like Australia. Little tray with 2 more USB-C ports, as I mentioned. And impressively, all of that soft touch material continues here to the back. So if you're sitting in the second row, you don't feel too short-changed, which is cool. Do have to watch this low roof line getting in and out though. Come around the back, and some people have said the styling around here is a bit derivative, and I tend to agree, but Mercedes have worked pretty hard on improving the boot space. So if you ever saw the old A-Class, you remember it had this unbelievably narrow aperture. That's been scrapped. Instead, there's now this wide opening, decent amount of space. You can see the 2 chasing cars suitcases fit no problem. The load lip, there is one, but it's not too bad, so you can kind of slide things in and out pretty easily. And classically for a German car, there's dedicated slots off to each side to keep delicate items from sliding around. You've got a 12-volt socket, we've got shopping bag hooks, so clearly this is a boot that's been thought out properly. So what is the new Mercedes-Benz A-Class like to drive? Well, I actually reckon it's pretty good to drive behind the wheel. I did drive the previous generation car a couple of times, actually when I was doing my own advanced driver training, which I did through Mercedes and Mercedes AMG a few years ago, and I always thought that car was okay, but nothing that special from behind the wheel. I actually reckon this one, as I was saying, is pretty plush. But that said, you have to be quite careful when you specify a new A-Class, because there's a couple of important differences between the different models that can make it really pleasant to drive, like this particular car I'm in now, or, you know, perhaps a little bit more average. And those differences come down to engine and also the suspension setup in the car. So let's talk about what's under the bonnet first. This car is an A250, which is, you know, that's basically the middle engine in the lineup if you take into account the 2 A-Class models that will be badged AMG this time. So the A250 is a 2-litre turbo, a Mercedes-Benz engine, the M260 engine, producing 165 kilowatts of power and 350 newton meters of torque. So that's, you know, that's pretty warm hatch sort of territory. That's, you know, the numbers that a Golf GTI was running a year or two ago. And so the A250 is good enough for a 6.2 second sprint to 100 if you have the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system fitted like this particular car does. So it's pretty sprightly, and it feels sprightly on the road. There's lots of torque. Peak torque comes on really linearly and smoothly, and all 350 newton meters are available at 1800 RPM. So there's never any problem with get up and go in this car. And it's, you know, it's not particularly laggy either. It's quite happy to respond quickly to throttle inputs, which is really nice. It's hooked up to a 7-speed dual clutch automatic, and most of the time that gearbox is pretty good. It's only at very low speed, kind of on and off the throttle quickly, can you feel a little bit of stuttering and sensitivity that is kind of archetypal to dual clutch transmissions, but the best DCTs don't exhibit those characteristics anymore. I think the Mercedes one still has a little way to go. Now, the other engines in the lineup currently are the A180 and the A200, and those two cars they both use a 1.3 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder, and that's sort of a co-development between Mercedes and Renault. There's a technical partnership between Mercedes, Renault and Nissan. And so the A180 is 100 kilowatts, 200 newton meters, and the A200 is 120 kilowatts, 250 newton meters. And those engines are fine, but really nothing special. So I actually drove the A200 in the UK a few months ago, and I just found it, yeah, the engine's a bit coarse, a bit thrashy, doesn't really feel like a Mercedes-Benz unit to me. So I would buy the A250. I just don't waste your time, don't mess about. If you're gonna buy a Mercedes-Benz, get one with a really nice engine like this. There'll also be an A35 and an A45 AMG, which kind of come in increasing degrees of bonkersness. So if you're after a little performance hatch, then one of those two I'm sure will do the trick, and I look forward to driving them in due course. The other thing that really matters to the driving experience in the A200 is picking a suspension setup. So this particular car has the best setup, and so that's independent rear suspension and adaptive dampers. So you get independent rear suspension on the A250, the A250 4MATIC, and on both of the AMG cars when they arrive. The other vehicles, the A180 and the A200, they have a cheaper torsion beam rear suspension setup that actually weighs a bit less, but it just doesn't deliver the refinement from the rear end over bumps, course surfaces, through corners. So once again, it's a case of kind of not mucking about and getting a suspension setup that's kind of worthy of the badge. And the independent rear is so much more supple and refined in the A-Class. The other thing is that the adaptive dampers really balance out the ride very nicely, and that's an option that I would be keen to tick if I was speccing up the car myself. There's really no problems at all with how this test car rides. I find it's firm but compliant in town, and its sort of grand touring ride on the highway and on rural roads is very nice. The rest of the attributes of driving the A-Class just remind of a nicely sorted premium hatch. So the steering's good. I think it's pretty quick and pretty light, so that's typical Mercedes-Benz steering. The chassis is lovely. It's a really nice resolved kind of chassis in this car, I would say. It feels to me like a classic sort of front-driven warm hatch. Nice agile front end, tips in nice and easy, and then a little dab of the brakes and cinch in the angle of attack on the corner, and the rear end floats around quite happily. The Bridgestone Turanza tyres, they're okay. They don't have limitless grip. They are Turanzas after all, but it'll dance with you. On a good back road, the A250 4MATIC, I actually reckon it's really nice and fun to drive. And then if you realize you're just understeering a bit wide, you can actually get on the throttle and you can feel the torque being sent rearwards. So it is really, you know, a functional all-wheel drive system, and one where you can feel it working, which is pretty cool. It's fairly quiet and refined, this car, especially on the motorway, and seeing out of it is easy. It's definitely easier than the previous gen car because the glass in the back is bigger. Now this particular car, this has got all of the safety boxes ticked, so it has a really full suite of safety tech, and it's quite cool that you don't have to buy a big boat of a Mercedes to get all the latest stuff. They're all here on this A-Class. So of course it's got things like high-speed AEB, it's got lane keep assist, it's got a 360-degree camera to help you when parking, it's got the whole lot. So those are my opinions on the new Mercedes-Benz A-Class. Now this A-Class is kind of like the second generation of, you know, this compact shape of Mercedes entry-level car, and you can see that this brand actually did learn the lessons from the previous time round and have implemented a bunch of really interesting changes in this car. I actually think it's good to drive, I think it looks pretty good, and I think it's comfortable inside, and importantly for a luxury brand, it does actually make you feel special to sit in, to drive in, and I think probably to own as well. Now, let me know below the video what you think of the Mercedes-Benz A-Class, and while you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss any of our full-length Australian video car reviews. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.